Okay, good morning to all of our lovely attendees. It's great to have you with us this morning. My name's Steve Connor. I run a company here in Manchester called Creative Concern, but I'm also the Net Zero lead for the Greater Manchester Local Enterprise Partnership. So I'd like to welcome both attendees from Greater Manchester, but I know we've got people from all sorts of sectors from beyond Greater Manchester as well, so you're very welcome this morning. And this is our Here for Business, Making Sense of the Energy Challenge webinar, brought to you by the Business Growth Hub here in Greater Manchester. So this morning, we're going to be tackling the big picture sort of scene setter on the energy crisis, rising energy prices, the rising costs of doing business with that context behind us. And this is the first of a series of weekly webinars that will be hosted by the Business Growth Hub, which will set out that context and then actually help businesses to navigate through that crisis, access support, and find ways to actually get through the next 6 months and beyond. So with those energy prices rising to unsustainable levels, as many of you will know, there's an energy bill relief scheme that we're going to find out more about shortly, which has been a lifeline for businesses, but questions still remain, and those are what we're going to try and tackle for you this morning. We've got an expert panel with us this morning, really great speakers, so I'm sure you'll find it really fascinating. They're going to look into what does it mean for business, what does the relief scheme entail, what comes after it, what can you do. So you get practical insights this morning, stuff that you'll be able to take away and work on immediately. So our speakers this morning are Kate Mulvaney, who's a senior consultant from Cornwall Insights, and she's going to kick us off. And we're really lucky to have you, Kate. It was so fab that you could join us this morning. We've got Kevin Lambert, a good colleague of mine, who's the Sustainability and Net Zero lead at the Business Growth Hub. We've got Rachel Gladwin, who's the director of the Utilities Intermediaries Association. So it's great to have Rachel with us. And then Alistair Dalzell-Job from the Business Growth Hub, who's a Sustainability and Net Zero advisor. So those are our speakers this morning. Can't wait to hear from them. If you want to ask questions of our speakers, there'll be time at the end. So we're going to run through all four of those speakers in turn. And then at the end, you can actually start asking questions using the question bar, which is just on the right hand of the screen. You'll see on the slide in front of us, it indicates where you can ask those questions. So please do pop those questions in, and then we'll be facilitating those questions, having a look at the ones we want to ask, and we'll do that right at the end of the session this morning. So that's the plan for the next hour. I hope you get loads out of it. And without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Kate Mulvaney. Over to you, Kate.
Good morning, I'm Kate Mulvaney. I work for Cornwall Insight. I am a senior consultant. I'll briefly explain who Cornwall Insight are. You may not have heard of us before. We're an energy consultancy based in Great Britain, but we also have offices internationally. We undertake modelling, consultancy work, market research, but we are absolutely focused on the matter of energy. And it's a combination of interests we have from the policy and regulatory end, but we also work very closely with businesses who are currently trying to navigate an incredibly difficult environment. It isn't just a question of price volatility and uncertainty and very high prices, but there's also political intervention and supply chain concerns as well. So we work with businesses of different sizes and local authorities. And so I was invited here today to try and explain some context of what's going on. Now, I think we'll as private individuals have struggled to miss the prominence of energy in the news. It isn't just a political matter or an economic matter. It affects absolutely every aspect of our lives, both professionally and I think personally as well. So to recap, there's a phrase that was popular probably about 10 years ago, the energy trilemma, and it's come back into usage over the last year. And that's the sustainability, affordability, and security conundrum. You can aspire to create an environment where energy is sustainable and affordable, but it maybe isn't as secure. Or you can have sustainability and security, but perhaps affordability becomes a challenge. So it's been illustrated in this trilemma fashion to try and draw out some of those particular issues. Decarbonisation is absolutely still a priority in GB. It is, well, it's a year since COP26 occurred. Some of you may have been involved in that. And decarbonisation is still there in the mix, even with change of government. It is still recognised as an important part of GB policy. The prices, of course, no one could have failed to have noticed the wholesale price has been extremely volatile and extremely high, which is what's prompted some of the intervention, which one of the later speakers will be talking about. And of course, the war in Ukraine has illustrated the importance of energy in geopolitics. There is a wider environment and a wider context in which energy flows between nations that we couldn't ignore, and which going forwards, I think the actions of the last year have really brought it home how important it is to consider any impact of energy policy on that geopolitical sphere as well. I'm going to start with a slightly depressing chart here. This is a wholesale power market forecast. So this is Cornwall Insight's view of what might be happening with the wholesale price to the end of this decade. So some of the modelling work that we undertake is to look ahead into the future to try and factor in different pressures, positive and negative, on power prices, gas prices, carbon prices. And this here is power or electricity. Now, we're not magicians. We can't sadly see the future with absolute clarity. So it is a model. It is a best guess based upon access to information, market intelligence, previous behaviour, and I've got some giant brain colleagues as well who all add into this. And this is a snapshot. This is a simplified view of a product that we sell to a range of customers who would like some understanding of and some insight into what might happen over the coming years. Now, I think what we can all see is that on the left-hand side, so the nearest term, we can see that there are still very high prices. Now that's 2023 and 2024. Those prices are high at the moment and they will remain high. Now, over the course of the decade, you will see the expectation is that prices will gradually decline. There will be some challenges as, for example, some of the nuclear fleet comes offline, some coal plants retire, and also there is an underlying expectation that gas prices will also stay high. Now, gas prices impact power prices because we use gas to produce electricity at some power plants. Gas can be particularly useful when you have a lot of wind or solar or intermittent renewable generation, because you need something for those periods of time where you aren't able to capture enough power through those intermittent resources if the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. And gas has proven itself so far to be suitable to fill those gaps, because you can turn on a gas power plant quite quickly and it will respond quite quickly. So the underlying high gas price for the rest of this decade, we think, is going to keep power prices above historical norms. Now, that dotted line that you can see, those two dotted lines you can see around the £50 per megawatt, that's the historical average price. The blue or darker dotted line is for winter and the red line is for summer. So you can see that even by the end of this decade, and this is not adjusted for, this would need to be adjusted for inflation. So this gap is in real terms. You can see by the end of the decade that prices are still well above what we consider to be historical norms. This chart contains an awful lot of information, and I don't want you all to squint trying to work out what all the different factors are. I've included it because I think it shows a more complete picture of the bills that I'm sure you're all seeing at the moment, and the challenges and why this is so important, this high wholesale price. So that previous chart was for just the wholesale price element, but I'm sure most of you have seen that on your gas and electricity bills, there's lots of other things that are included. Now, some of it's things like taxation or policy costs. Some of it are things like network charges. So for both gas and electricity, the cost of moving that gas or electricity around the country from wherever it enters the country, or for electricity wherever it's generated, moving that to your front door, whether it's your home or your business, obviously that needs funding as well. So the chart we have here, we've got 4 columns, and it's the year 2021, and then one year to 23, 24 on the right hand side. The dark colour on my screen, it's a dark blue. That percentage is the wholesale cost percentage. And as you can see, up until last year, that wholesale price, the price of the commodity, the gas or the electricity itself, probably made up less than half of the total costs that you were paying as an organisation. And then you see 21, 22, that proportion has increased significantly. And then you look at 23, 24, and those other costs, those non-commodity costs, they're a fraction of the overall bill. The driving cost of rising bills is absolutely the wholesale price. You can see a fairly steady amount of charges. Now, there are some variations year on year, but compared to that rising wholesale cost, it's absolutely negligible. So you can see, unfortunately, 23 and 22, 23 and 23, 24, that dark colour that makes up the wholesale cost, it's staying high. So the bills, the amount that organisations have to pay for gas and electricity, it's the high prices are driven by the wholesale cost, and of course that is affecting every single stage of the supply chain. I'm sure your organisations are struggling to reconcile the cost and with your budget, with your expected expenditure, and I'm sure all of your suppliers are as well. I'm sure your employees are. You as an individual, I'm sure, getting your bill at home is not fun, and so any wage increases, any additional revenue you're receiving, that could very well all be absorbed by these higher energy costs. So this is my final slide, and it's a summary of some thoughts around where we are, who's most impacted, and also what steps organisations can take. I'm going to start off with, it's not quite good news, because obviously it's in the face of these, this horrible geopolitical situation and very difficult economic circumstances. But I want to start off by saying these very, very high costs are already making some energy efficiency measures that were previously unviable. They are making them viable. The return on any investment in energy efficiency, on on-site generation, battery storage, things that 2 years ago maybe were being considered, but it was just going to take too long for payback. That is probably not the case right now. So if I can say that there is one opportunity here, it is those things that long term are going to support the health of your organization, that potentially could insulate you from future price volatility, that could help with decarbonisation. Those schemes that historically weren't viable, it may be worth revisiting those. And then, as well as the economics being different, I think attitudes are different. You might have previously gone to your financial director with a solid case, and they said, you know what, it's just not worth our time at the moment. Now everyone gets it. Every single person who is involved in running a business or a charity or works at the public sector, they understand it isn't just a numbers case. It's not just about avoiding the high costs. It's also about insulating yourself from that price volatility. So budgets year on year can be set. So if you are lucky enough to have, say, space for on-site generation and storage, and you've got access to a funding stream, or can enter into a partnership with someone else, that might help insulate you from some very difficult price volatility. And it could also potentially act as a revenue stream as well. Now, I know that's not suitable for everyone. I know not all organisations own the buildings they operate in. Not everyone can access that level of funding. But I would then encourage people to look at energy efficiency measures that are suitable for your organisation. There's no one size fits all here. We've been working with a very, very wide range of organisations, hospitals, glassworks, as well as actually investors in renewable technologies themselves. So, wind farms, battery operators. There's a lot going on out there. And as I say, the business case for your organisation may have changed. So do consider going back to those plans, even if they didn't get as far as you'd like last time. So with that opportunity in mind, I'll recap here. We know that the first wave, the biggest impact, is affecting industrial organisations, very high energy intensive organisations, because they are more likely exposed to the wholesale market. Even those that hedge, so those that have strategies for securing energy well in advance, we know that they're winding down, and particularly after this winter, there are not going to be many organisations that aren't fully exposed to the wholesale price, accepting the intervention from the government. And we also know as well organisations that were hit badly by COVID, so in particular hospitality and leisure, they are also already feeling the strain. There's an awful lot of information about attitudes in business, and you can see these leading edge of these organisations having the most significant focus on energy prices, but you can see every single industry ticking up behind it. They're just there first. Everyone is going to be affected. Likewise, there are some regions where there are signs that this is causing stress earlier on, but again, we expect this to follow. We've called out here Yorkshire, Humber, West Midlands, North East. I know as well, unfortunately, parts of Wales are also indicating the impact of those higher prices, and that is unfortunately potentially going to have an impact on employment levels, investment, and just all around the health of UK PLC. And we're also seeing on the supplier side, so this is energy suppliers, your gas supplier, your electricity supplier. There has been reports of withdrawn products. We know some suppliers just aren't operating in some spaces anymore. Where you maybe have a contract at renewal, it may be that the supplier isn't really interested in keeping your business, but it may also be there's a reduced number of suppliers offering services for your organisation. We're also hearing reports of increased credit requirements, short-term contracts, to sort of minimise exposure on both sides. So it's a very challenging time, and I think particularly for businesses and organisations that are energy intensive, but not exclusively so. Altogether, I think that the focus, if it's within your organisation's gift, is to revisit energy efficiency measures first and foremost. And if you are able, there are some other opportunities potentially in things like corporate power purchase agreements, which we haven't had a chance to go into today, but there's information on the Cornwall Insight website about those. In potentially engaging in demand side response, so you may be paid to use less. Again, that's probably best spoken to with your energy supplier, but wider mitigation opportunities may present themselves, so keep an eye out for those.
Thank you. Thanks, Kate. Brilliant stuff. Thanks so much for that second scene there. I like what you did. It was quite depressing for a bit, but you fed in loads of opportunities, which is excellent. And I can report, I've had a look at the attendees. There are finance directors on the webinar, so clearly the message is getting through. So that's excellent. Thank you, Kate. Just a quick thing before I hand over to Kevin. I noticed in the questions, a number of you had problems seeing the slides. And as our colleague Ben said, if you just refresh your screen, they should pop up for you so that you can see them. I think a number of you already solved that problem. But we're now going to move on to that little bit more detail about the Energy Bill Relief Scheme. And I'm going to hand over to Kevin Lambert from the Business Growth Hub. Kevin, over to you. Kevin, you're on mute. Classic. Straight in there. You did it.
Always. Thanks very much, Steve. So my name is Kevin Lambert. I'm Sustainability and Net Zero Lead at the Growth Hub. I'm going to talk through the UK government's Energy Bill Relief Scheme. I think the first thing to say about this scheme, it is big, it is impressive, and it is on a grand scale. The bill itself is the government's response in trying to support businesses over the coming winter months. And it's to try to tackle those high energy prices that Kate was talking about. Now, it sets out to provide inclusive support for the non-domestic energy consumers. There are a few exceptions that are businesses that aren't included. So these typically would be in the energy generation side and those selling back onto the grid, such as power stations, pumped hydro, and grid-level battery storage. The scheme itself will run for 6 months, and it started October 1st this month, and it's due to end in March 23. And essentially it's trying to support the businesses over those traditional winter months, that's first 6 months. There will be a review of the scheme after 3 months, and the focus of the review will be on those vulnerable customers, those who are least able to adjust their business model or pass on the prices, or not able to reduce their consumption. And certainly Kate highlighted some of the sectors, both sectors, geography, size of businesses are all in play in terms of those vulnerable customers. Part of the review will be how effective the scheme has been in supporting the vulnerable groups, which groups will remain particularly vulnerable going forward. And it will also look at how the government can continue to support them. If it's identified that additional support is needed for these vulnerable organizations, then the intention is to put something in place which will follow on immediately when this scheme ends. It's worth highlighting at the moment, the scheme still needs to go through Parliament. It hasn't been passed in legislation yet, and that needs to be done in order to enact the scheme. There is a plan to bring it into Parliament in October. I guess a lot of you will have seen the news and be aware that the scheme will cost the UK taxpayer billions of pounds. And I believe it's safe to say it's not a long-term solution in its current setup. So for the majority of businesses, it is expected that the scheme will end in March in its current form. Next slide, please. So in terms of eligibility, the scheme is available to organisations on a non-domestic electricity and gas contract. So it includes businesses, both large and small. It covers the voluntary sector organisations, such as charities. It includes public sector organisations, schools, hospitals, and care homes. They're all covered. And it will apply to those who are on an existing fixed price contract that were agreed on or after the 1st of December 21. Initially, in its original format, the date came out as the 1st of April 2022. But this has changed. It changed yesterday. The reason for setting the date is that there is a belief that those who had a fixed contract prior to that date wouldn't have been impacted so much by the wholesale price increases. And clearly, the BEIS have gone back and done a bit more work and then decided to move it from the 1st of April to further back to the 1st of December. And again, that reflects some of the information that Kate was showing up as well about the prices. So it applies to those who are on a fixed price contract, but also those who are about to sign a new fixed price contract, those on deemed or out of contract or variable tariffs, and those on a flexible purchase or similar contracts. So it is setting out to be inclusive. It's trying to deal with all organizations, non-domestic, and is trying to support people regardless of the contracts that they're actually on. Next slide, please. So how does it impact your costs? And it is worth pointing out, and I think Kate did a great job in terms of showing your energy price is made up of a variety of different components. And these include network costs, operating costs, supplier margins, levies, VAT, and the wholesale cost. So the Energy Bill Relief Scheme is providing a discount on the wholesale element of the bill. When the scheme was devised, the expected winter wholesale price was forecast to be around £600 per megawatt hour, or in effect 60 pence per kilowatt. And that's for electricity. And it was also suggested it would be £180 per megawatt hour for gas. To help put that into perspective, according to Ofgem, the weekly average forward price on the 11th of October 2021 was just over £113. So we just reflect on that. That's a 4 or 5-fold increase that we're talking about in prices. So the government set a supported price, and that's been set at £211 per megawatt hour. So that's the cap in terms of what you'll be paying if you're on a fixed price contract. And it's £75 per megawatt hour for gas, or 7.5 pence per kilowatt. Now, these figures only apply to the wholesale price, so your bill will be higher when you add in the additional charges. It also means that for many organisations, the price you paid this winter may well be higher than what you're used to paying, even with the relief scheme in place. Although having said that, it's also worth remembering that without this scheme, the costs would be substantially higher had the government not stepped in to support. Move on to the next slide, please. So how will the scheme be applied? For those with fixed contracts, it will apply to you if the contract was signed on or after the 1st of December 2021. And as I mentioned before, it is expected that those on a fixed price contract signed before that date, they will be paying a lower price than what the government is setting the support at. So the discount will reflect the difference between the wholesale price at the time the contract was signed and then the government supported price. For those on variable, deemed and other contracts, the discount reflects the difference between the wholesale price and the government supported price, but it will be subject to a maximum discount of £345 per megawatt hour for electricity and £91 per megawatt hour for gas. So those companies who are still, organisations who are still on a variable or other contracts, a non-fixed contract, you're still potentially exposed to higher prices in the wholesale market. If they rise substantially beyond what's expected, then you could see much higher prices coming through on your bills. Next slide, please. Sorry. So how do you get the reduction? Well, the good news is you don't need to do anything to get the relief. The support will be automatically applied by your supplier. If you are billed for your energy by your landlord or via a heat network company or an energy service company, they're all expected to pass on the benefits in a proportional way to you. So your per unit energy cost will be reduced by the relevant pence per kilowatt hour, and the savings should apply from October consumption. And you should start to see that appearing in November bills. Now, clearly suppliers are working very hard to make this happen, and there's a possibility that in some cases there may be some delays. So I would suggest you just keep an eye on your next few bills just to make sure all is as it should be. And as I said, you don't need to take action, and suppliers will do all the heavy lifting, but please be aware of the potential for scams and fraudsters, typically asking for your bank details or additional information that you don't need to provide. The scheme will take care of it in terms of putting the relief onto your existing contract. So I think for me, the key actions to take away, if you're not on a variable, if you're not on a fixed price contract, then review the options, take a look at which options are out there at the moment, but please read the T's and C's carefully. With some suppliers, they are looking to address some of the risks that they see in the market on some of the other charges, not just the wholesale price. So you need to make sure that that contract will work for you. And depending on the time frame of the contract, bear in mind that this scheme covers you for 6 months. And it's what happens after that 6 months. So be careful when you're reading those T's and C's and make sure it works for you. I would suggest you keep an eye on your next couple of bills just to make sure that the relief has been applied. You may want to talk to your landlord or your energy service company or the heat network company just to confirm that they will be passing on those reductions for you as well. And last but no means least, please use the next 6 months to identify and take measures to reduce your consumption. The relief is a temporary scheme, but the cost savings from action can be permanent. So start to look at those opportunities, dig out those old projects that were put in the drawer months or years ago, dust them off and see what else you can do to reduce your energy consumption and protect you going forward. And on that, I'll hand you back to Steve. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kevin. That was a really helpful introduction. And yet again, you know, the emphasis on make sure you get those energy consumption levels down while you've got that opportunity. Brilliant. Right. So many of you will be thinking about how you currently purchase your energy, and you'll be thinking about your energy broker. So I'd like to hand over now to Rachel Gladwin, who's the Director of the Utilities Intermediaries Association, just to take us through some of those issues. Rachel, over to you.
Hi, hello everyone. So I'm Rachel and I'm a director at the Utilities Intermediaries Association. What we are is a trade association for what we call TPIs, third-party intermediaries, that can be made up of brokers, consultants, quite a wide range. All our members are signed to a notice and a customer redress scheme, and that obviously requires them to adhere to our standards set out in the code, and also to abide by any disciplinary process if a complaint from a consumer has been upheld. Now, you can view the code on our website in full. Just some examples of the code requirements for you to sort of take a look at here. I'm guessing some of you already use TPIs. Some of them may not be UIA members. That's not to say that they're not doing this already, but these are the sort of things that are actually in our code. So our members are legally bound to ensure that they are following through our code requirements. So, for example, and it's very important, you know, they mustn't do anything that's going to bring themselves, the reputation of TPIs as a whole, into disrepute. They must demonstrate openness, clarity, and truthfulness in their dealings with clients. And that's quite important. Members should always use a letter of authority. I will go into detail on that later because that is quite an important document that clients sign. And a member will never prevent a client from speaking to a supplier. And the important point is, if there is an issue and you have a complaint against a UIA member, then they have to have a complaint process and they must acknowledge that within 5 working days and give you a likely date for resolution. But at any time, you can actually come to us at UIA if you are concerned. Apologies for the picture. This was my colleague who did this. Not all TPIs look like that, but some of them do. So what is a TPI? So it's someone who can help you find an energy contract to fit your brief and then hold your hand throughout the duration of the contract to whatever degree you have chosen. They can simply act as a prompt towards the end of your contract, like a simple brokerage service, or they can be your energy manager and all things in between. So there's quite a wide range there. A good TPI will help you to find the best value contract for your business. And by value, it doesn't necessarily mean price. There could be other attributes that are important to you. The whole point really of a TPI is to free up your time so you can actually concentrate on running your core business. And they should be able to make use of their relationship with suppliers and their understanding of suppliers to know which one is the best fit for you. And also, if there are any issues, hopefully with the relationship that they have with those suppliers, it may be that they can create a bit of wriggle room around disputes and so on. They'll keep you informed of any industry news which has a bearing on your business. And of course, they're there. You should be able to tap into their knowledge and expertise of the energy industry. So what should you expect from a TPI? So I mentioned earlier about a letter of authority. Most of you are probably familiar with that. It's an agreement between you and them, and it sets out what they should do for you. It's important to add, really, that whether you approach TPI directly or they contact you, you should never feel under pressure to use their services. And that can be hard sometimes. You may feel, pressurized because price is going quickly, but, don't allow them to pressurize you. It's really important to ask how they're remunerated and what services they're going to provide for you as part of that agreement. Be wary of any TPI that advertises that their service is free. Some of them do, and it's just not true. So if you actually look along this slide here, you can see the things that should be as a minimum on a letter of authority or a client agreement that you have with them. Duration, you don't want an open-ended contract with no expiry date, because that's giving them carte blanche to access and talk to suppliers forevermore, really, until you actually expressly stop that. Services that are going to be delivered, whether they're sort of working just with one supplier, are they sourcing all the market? What factors are being used to reach a recommendation for you? I mean, it could be the lowest offer, or it could be other things. They might have a longer payment term that is more suitable for you. Obviously, the origin of all considerations and fees. An important one here is the cancellation or termination conditions. Some of them will have cancellation termination clauses within these LOAs, and I'll go into that a bit more detail later. That's quite important. And obviously, a complaints procedure. That is the bare minimum that you should expect on a letter of authority from the TPI. Now, what you've got to watch out for, I've covered this a little bit already, but be really careful with some of the clauses. If you see something that reads along the lines of a broker mail deal solely with the supplier in all matters relating to the gas and the electricity, for example, what this is effectively doing is it's creating a power of attorney. You are giving that TPI the right to sign contracts on your behalf, and they're actually stopping you from speaking to that supplier. The other important thing here, and I mentioned it earlier, are you liable for lost commission? What I'm referring to here, for example, is we've seen letters of authority, which then has a little clause that says, has a link that then takes you into a website with further terms and conditions. And within those terms and conditions, it will say that if the supply contract that they placed you with has fallen through, then they are entitled to recover their costs from you. And if you signed it, then you do have to pay those costs. And we do know some business consumers who have been affected by this. So if you see a link in an LOA, you need to go in that link and you need to have a look at it, because there could be more things in there that you do need to know about. The other thing is, and I know Kate has covered this and Kevin a little bit, there's more than wholesale prices within your energy price. You've got other aspects as well. Now, a less scrupulous broker may omit some of those charges to make that price look better, but then you will still get billed for those. So they win your business, they may sign you into a contract, you're thinking you're getting a set unit right, and for example, it may be that the only thing that's actually set is the wholesale, and you've got an extra 30% on top of that to pay in additional charges for the network, balancing, distribution, and so on. So these are points to consider whether you use a TPI or not. I think these are sort of important things to bear in mind. Crucially, your contract is with the supplier, not the TPI, and you're bound by those terms. So if you've signed a contract and then for some reason, perhaps another TPI has been on board or a supplier's approached you, given you a better price, and you decide that you're going to go with them instead, and this does tend to happen more at the smaller end of the business market, then you could well find yourself liable to some hefty charges from the supplier that you signed the original contract with. Now, it's really important, and again, Kevin mentioned this, you've got to know what the key terms of your supply agreements are. So, for example, are there fixed penalties for early termination? If you miss a direct debit payment, can they increase your price? Will they require advance payment? An important one is changes to consumption. And we did find that after the last lockdown, that quite a few business consumers were being hit by some suppliers with what we call take or pay charges. So this is where you have contracted to use a certain amount of energy over the duration of the contract. And then because you haven't fulfilled that, because of lockdown in this case, the supplier can then come back to you and charge you a take or pay, which is a portion of the cost to them in having to then sell that energy back to the network. And a lot of customers that got in contact with us were badly affected by this around October of last year. So take or pay contracts, it's really important to scrutinise those. The other thing is, and it's an important one, is whether the price is fixed for the duration. And there's an area of complexity around here. TPIs should be able to help you through this, but as you know, your energy is just one component of those charges. So you need to be looking very carefully at what's on the offer and also what's in the terms and conditions to find what is included. Sometimes you can have scenarios where they may pass through costs if it goes over a set margin, or it's just that they fix the energy. So you really do need to sort of look in this in detail so you don't get any nasty surprises at a later stage. Now,
1 minute, please, Rachel. Thank you.
Verbal contracts. Be aware that they're legally binding, so do not give consent until you fully understand what's being offered. And be aware as well that there is no cooling off period for businesses. There may be for micro businesses at a later stage, but that isn't happening now. So if you sign anything or agree anything verbally, that's it, you're locked in. So all of our members carry the UIA boat map, or accredited members carry the UIA boat map. So you're aware that they have a code of practice. So obviously, I would say if you're thinking of using a TPI, then perhaps have a look on our website first, and there's the details there. Just as a general, what are protections there for business consumers? Often don't have the legal powers to directly regulate TPIs. So they have to do so indirectly via suppliers. We do have some powers under the BPMMRs, which is business protection from misleading marketing regulations, but to date, they haven't used it that we're aware of. What protection there is for business consumers is limited to the small micro businesses, and it's not as extensive as those afforded to domestic consumers. And for SMEs upwards, you're wholly reliant really on the courts for redress. If you have a dispute and you can't resolve it with your supplier, that is the only option really that's available to you. I'm missing some slides.
I think, Rachel, you're just about done. We're running over slightly.
Sorry, I am actually missing some slides there, so it's chopped off, unfortunately. But I guess you recorded this so people could access the other slides, and it's fairly extensive. It will sort of help them with that.
Brilliant. Thanks, Rachel. Yes, I was literally about to say. Thanks, Rachel. I was about to say, actually, there were so many really important tips and instructions in there that people probably were scribbling frantically, Rachel, while you were going through that, because there was loads in there. There will be the opportunity to see these slides again. They will be shared with everybody attending today, so that if you didn't get everything written down there when Rachel's running through, it will be shared with you afterwards. Great. Well, our final speaker this morning is Alistair from the Business Growth Hub, who's going to take us through all those actions you should be taking in the next 6 months. Alistair, over to you.
Steve, thanks very much. So in terms of what we've heard so far is the forecast, the forward look, the government support, as Kevin mentioned, only for the next 6 months, and looking at how you buy and deal with brokers with contracts going forwards. But as this is only a 6-month grace period, and it is just a support package that's going to help you through the next 6 months. What can you do to maximize your resilience going forwards during those 6 months? So I'm just going to take you through some very top level 4 steps that you can act on right now. So as all people say in management speak, data, if you don't measure it, you can't manage. If you don't monitor it, you can't manage it. If you don't understand it, you can't manage it. So the number one thing I would say from a business point of view to tackle energy efficiency, so reducing your consumption, is get a handle on your data. You've got to understand where and when you are using your energy, gas or electricity. And you can get that obviously in the form of meter readings yourself to take them on a regular basis. You can get that from your billing, and you can get that from half-hourly data. And interestingly, from the 1st of December this year, as part of the phase 3 of the ESOS regulations, there is going to be a legal requirement for energy suppliers to provide you with half-hourly data or hourly data for gas, free of charge from your supplier. So if you aren't already aware of that and haven't already got access to that, if you've got half-hourly data, that will be more readily available. And so obviously what you're using there is you're using visible information to help you spot anomalies in consumption, help you spot where and when you're using that energy. And that's going to be important for things like this when you're looking at 2 different months worth of energy data. This here, we've got a relief map of energy data, and you can use some form of conditional formatting, or in this case, you're looking at a surface contour graph on Excel. It's a relatively straightforward way to look at it. But if you see here in June last year versus July last year, what's the difference? We can visibly see we're using a lot more energy here on the right, specifically during the day, but also out of hours in that blue areas on the left-hand side. Why on earth is there now more consumption out of hours when the site should be closed down? So it's a very quick and easy way to spot anomalies and identify that energy data you're using outside of normal patterns of hours, and look at energy patterns during consumption during your operations as well. It can also help identify what's called a base load. So this is your energy consumption that runs on continually in the background, or potentially other people refer to it as a phantom load. So it's machinery, equipment that may be left on standby that constantly consumes energy on a daily basis, and that can actually build up to quite considerable amounts of money over a year. So in addition to this data, the second thing you really need to look at is using that data to walk around the site to understand where energy is used and link the two together. So this is looking at operational hours during breaks, during lunch times, and also understanding where and when people are adjusting temperatures for everything from heating to process ovens and manufacturing equipment, and set points or times or timers and controls that are being used across your sites. So linking the two together and maybe doing some tweaks and adjustments can be a very good way to highlight energy wastage. And that's obviously the number one thing you want to look at. The other one is looking at out of hours usage, taking maybe a check of a meter on the last thing on a Friday when you shut down for the week, and reading it again on Monday first thing. If you don't have access to half-hourly data, that's a really quick way of understanding where those energy wastages are occurring. So in addition to this, the only real way you can have lasting and embedded energy efficiency is by getting people along with you on this journey. So behavior change and embedding behavior change within your company can get you quicker savings than any other energy saving measures. It can achieve those savings at a lower cost. And if you're using equipment less, or you're switching lights on less, you're switching motors on less, it extends the life of that equipment by reducing wear and tear, and potentially extends the time until we need to invest in new equipment. One other interesting point is where potentially you might have to look at capital investment, behavior change, so getting people to switch things off when not needed is a long-term investment. It can be long-lasting and can last the course, whereas investment in equipment, whilst a big decision for a company, may need to be reinvested in, say, 10, 15, 20 years when that equipment runs out its useful life. It can also be the number one thing that helps you getting that low-hanging fruit, that really quick wins, energy saving. And obviously, if people are improving their activities in the work setting, hopefully they'll be taking that home as well and improve their energy efficiency at home. So as we heard from, I think, most people today, one of the key differences is that return on investment. So if your understanding was that you've done all of this in the past, you've looked at energy projects, for example, a lighting project or a solar panel project, and it was at the time, it didn't really make financial sense. Well, that might well have been because it was a 7-year payback or as in this case, a 14% return on investment. But today's money, it could be down as low as 2, possibly 3-year payback for that same investment. So it's updating the business case, but more importantly, it's using the language that people will understand. If you're talking to a finance director, use return on investment, payback periods. If you're talking to an engineer, use the language they understand. How is it going to make their life easier? How is it going to make their job better every day that they're working in that environment? So if it's lighting, that might improve the quality of light, reduce quality rejects in the process, and it might improve the remedial rates, for example. Something to consider at the moment is we're hearing from suppliers in, for example, the solar PV market. They're looking at people who have getting quotes through to install and solar panel systems commissioned on their site is somewhere between 4 to 6 months. So that's even more reason to start to look at larger energy projects now, whilst you have this grace period. But also, obviously, we will be looking at this in a great deal more in our next session on the 18th next week. And we'll be going to a bit more of a deep dive into energy efficiency measures in more detail. But these are just 4 things you can start to look at now. And I'll hand you back over to Steve.
Brilliant. Thanks, Alistair. Yes, I was going to say just another reminder that there is that webinar this time next week, isn't it, Alistair, where we can start to get even deeper into the opportunities around energy reduction. Great. So we've had some brilliant questions in the Q&A function, which is wonderful. I'm going to start actually coming straight back to you, Rachel, if that's okay, because we've got a couple of questions from one of our attendees, Ian, which shows how pressing all of this is. What advice would you give to anyone who's literally looking at renewing their contract in the next coming weeks while it's still so crazy? I'm sorry, these might be impossible questions, but have a go at it. And just to recap on some of your points, what do you think right now would be a good deal for them to land? What would look like a reasonable contract for them to land in terms of their energy?
Okay, so at the moment, because of the way the energy price support works, the government are sort of actively trying to encourage businesses to go on to a fixed price. So I would say probably in the near term, you're probably best getting onto a fixed price if you can, unless you're a really large customer and you've got that kind of wherewithal. But the point is, with the fixed price, we know that they've set a rate for the wholesale element, and that's in place, obviously, for those 6 months. Whereas with the flexible, they've set a sort of maximum amount that they are willing to apply. So we're finding that, the advice would seem to be for many to go on to that fixed price for the duration of the price support. The big question is, well, how long do you contract for? A lot of people are just contracting for that 6-month period. Even sort of based on knowing what the price support roughly is, it's still a big increase. For many businesses, the thought of it being more is actually quite frankly untenable. So, they're sort of really concerned. I think some people are going for, say, a 12-month because, like you say, long-term forecast, if those offers are available, that is that prices will remain high. But I think a lot are hoping that the 3-month review, that there will be a new scheme in place that's going to be quite comprehensive. And I think it will have to be fair. So I can't really give you, I'm afraid, an idea of what would be a good price, because at the moment, the prices that customers are seeing is what the whole price would be without the discount. And until they get that October bill, and it's the same for the TPIs that are trying to support them, we're not going to know what it looks like.
Thanks, Rachel. No, completely understand. Kate, can I come back to you actually with a couple of questions we've had? One a really practical one, I think around any wider electricity market reform that can be expected. Is there anything coming in online there? But then also we had attendee Vinny asking, will the conflict in Ukraine change anything if it's resolved? How much is conflict with Russia actually creating this problem? You've heard that from politicians, haven't you?
No, those are two really good questions. So the first one is actually a pet topic of mine, so I'll try not to talk for 10 hours. Yes, so there is currently a review of the electricity market arrangements underway. REMA, is it's catchily called. The consultation, the initial phase, closed yesterday, and this was issued by BEIS. And this is in response to recognition that it's not good that the price of power is set by gas prices when gas prices are so high. It's not good that there are constraints affecting the usefulness of renewable generation. Costs are potentially higher than they ultimately need to be with some different market design choices. So it's very much recognised that there has to be reflection on the root causes of some of the prices that we're seeing. And then the second issue is around if there's a resolution of the conflict in Ukraine, if there was, say, a political solution really swiftly, which I'm sure we're all hoping for a peaceful solution as soon as possible. Our view is probably not, unfortunately. The reason being that the signals from Europe are that there are very significant changes in policy that aren't going to be undone. So let's say tomorrow peace broke out, hostilities ended. It's unlikely that Europe is going to go back to buying that that Russian gas. So the question, I know there's a question around how much of our gas came from Russia, a tiny fraction of a percent. If you look over the last 10 years, virtually it's almost a rounding error some years, how little gas we get. The real issue for GB, and also for anyone who's got offices in any part of Ireland, the real issue is that the competition for gas globally has just gone through the roof. So Europe is desperately trying to secure the same LNG that we are. There are challenges around just actually moving that gas around. There are constraints. There's a lot of pressure, and that means that the market, the way it's designed, the prices just go up and up and up. So although it would be wonderful if there is peace in Ukraine, I would be very surprised if it resulted in a very significant short drop. And then I think there's one other thing as well that maybe answers another question in the chat. Part of the problem as well is that people have been securing gas at these high prices because they've just been going higher and higher. So again, even if the spot price, that's the very near-term prices, even if you see in the papers that gas prices for next week have come down because there's a new LNG ship in or something else like that, chances are the prudent operator won't have a chance to take advantage of that because they'll have secured gas probably at higher prices. So I'm not asking you to have sympathy for your energy supplier. I am saying that if you do read that these prices are falling, it won't immediately translate in all likelihood to lower costs. I mean, it's great news. It's a great signal. Hopefully it'll last, but your supplier and everyone involved in the chain will probably have still bought at these high prices because that was probably the prudent thing to do. So just watch out for that as well.
Great, thanks, Kate. That's super helpful, and answered actually. You swept through about 5 of our questions all in one go there. That was brilliant. Kevin and Alistair, I'm going to finish up with some questions for you. Kevin, first of all, some practical ones, and then Alistair, we've had questions around any support that's out there for business looking at any renewable energy schemes or anything in that sort of space. So I'll come to you on that in a moment. But Kevin, on the energy relief scheme specifically, we've had questions, one from Joanna about housing providers, are they covered? Also, anybody working from home, self-employed, anybody doing a business startup at the moment? There must be a lot of people who are just worried whether they're actually covered by the scheme. Could you clarify some of that for us?
I guess it depends what your contract actually is, whether it is a non-domestic contract. So if you're working from home, you may be on a domestic energy bill, of which there's already something in place to cap that in terms of a maximum price. So it does depend on what contract that you have. With regards to there was the question about the homes. I wasn't sure what side that question was coming from, whether it was from the organization perspective or whether it was from the actual tenant perspective. But like I said, it does depend on what the contract is. So if you're on a domestic bill, there's already a cap in place, which will limit the amount you can be charged on your energy. And then when you've got the non-domestic area, it varies slightly, whether it's a fixed price contract or whether it's a variable.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kevin. And I think finally, because we are running over slightly, but we've still got well over 100 people with us. So clearly people want to hear more on this. Alistair, I thought we could finish up with you because it's kind of a segue into next week's webinar, isn't it?
Yeah.
What kind of support is out there for businesses looking? Rachel, Kate, Kevin have all trailed that we should be using the 6 months to take out.
Absolutely.
Is there any support out there? And specifically, what support is there from the Business Growth Hub?
Yeah, so in terms of one-to-one and one-to-many support for businesses across Greater Manchester, if you're an SME, you can get fully funded support at the moment to tackle all these issues we've talked about today, primarily focusing on energy reduction, energy efficiency, but we also look at water waste management as well. Nationally, there is support available within similar organisations, and I think we'll probably put a link to a support finder tool as well. It's just about tackling it head on, not burying your head in the sand and think it'll go away in 6 months, which it won't. And making sure you contact us if you are one of those eligible businesses, we can help you on this journey.
Brilliant. Thanks, Alistair. So I am going to wrap us up. We're sort of 5 minutes past 10 now, but we've got through a huge amount this morning. It only remains for me to just emphasize again, but the signal we're getting is this isn't stopping anytime soon, and action, don't sit on your hands, take some action, take the advice you've heard this morning, get some help and get those energy levels down and get those costs down. So next week, we've got the next webinar, which is what you can practically do, those next steps, how you can manage and reduce your energy consumption, make yourself more resilient in the future from future price shocks. So please do make sure you attend that webinar next week. And as you can see on the screen now, if you go to businessgrowthhub.com, you can book your place there, but there's also a wider suite of support and advice available on that website. So please do visit that. If you're in Greater Manchester, I could just give a quick plug to our Be Net Zero program, which is trying to get all our businesses, 125,000 of them, on the journey to net zero. So please check out benetzero.com. And just my final thing this morning is just to say thank you again to our brilliant speakers this morning. We've got through a huge amount, massively fascinating insights, and hundreds of people have been online listening to your very wise advice. So I'm really, really grateful. And of course, thank you to everybody behind the scenes who's been making sure this webinar moved so smoothly and brilliantly. So have a really good day, everybody. Thanks for joining us, and please do join us again next week. Thank you.